Here's why Aegon II betrayed his sister Helaena by forcing her into queenship. The Targaryens have long been a dynasty defined by fire, ambition, and tragedy. From dragonlords to scheming heirs, the line of Valyria's last scions has always been a tale of power, desire, and betrayal. But few acts of betrayal are as chilling, as calculated, and as heartbreaking as the one committed by Aegon II Targaryen against his own sister, Helaena. Today, we're diving deep into the reasons behind this fateful betrayal, uncovering a story that is as political as it is personal, as horrifying as it is human. Brace yourself, because what Aegon II did to Helaena is a story of ambition, cruelty, and the heavy price of power in the Targaryen court. To truly understand Aegon II's actions, we need to first understand Helaena herself. Princess Helaena Targaryen was known throughout King's Landing for her gentleness, her intelligence, and her deep sense of empathy. She was beloved by many for her charm and her kind heart, yet her life was always defined by the expectations of others, particularly those imposed by her family. Helaena was a woman of intellect and sensitivity, a princess who could have grown into a powerful, influential figure in her own right. But instead of being allowed to flourish, she was manipulated, coerced, and ultimately forced into a role she never wanted, the position of queen. At the center of this tragedy stands Aegon II, Helaena's older brother. Aegon was ambitious, proud, and dangerously aware of his place within the Targaryen succession. With the death of King Viserys I, the question of the throne became urgent, and every move, every alliance, and every decision carried consequences that could ignite civil war. Aegon II's betrayal of his sister was not merely an act of cruelty, it was a calculated maneuver to solidify his claim to the Iron Throne, to eliminate perceived obstacles, and to assert his dominance over the Targaryen dynasty. The politics surrounding Helaena's forced queenship were complex, and deeply entwined with the legacy of her family. Helaena had been married once before, but her status as a Targaryen princess meant that her life, and even her choices, were never truly her own. Aegon II saw her potential influence not as a person, but as a political tool. By forcing her into queenship, he was able to secure the loyalty of factions that might otherwise resist his claim, while simultaneously neutralizing the threat posed by any alliances she could form independently. In other words, Helaena was a pawn in the high-stakes game of Westerosi power, a game where family ties are fragile, and betrayal is often the most effective weapon. But it wasn't just political pragmatism that drove Aegon II. Beneath the surface, there were darker impulses at play. Aegon II was known for his arrogance, his ruthless ambition, and his desire to assert control over those around him. Helaena's gentle nature and her reluctance to embrace power as he did made her, in his eyes, a liability. Her independent thinking, her moral compass, and her refusal to be merely a tool threatened to undermine the careful image of authority he was trying to construct. By forcing her into queenship, he could simultaneously assert dominance over her, and present an image of Targaryen unity that would mask the fractures in his rule. It is important to note the psychological dimensions of this betrayal. Helaena, as a young woman of intelligence and moral sensitivity, was ill-prepared for the cruelty of her brother's ambitions. She trusted her family, she believed in the sanctity of her role, and she likely expected that her brother, as the heir and as her sibling, would protect her rather than exploit her. The emotional impact of being coerced into queenship was devastating. Helaena's story is not just one of political manipulation, it is a story of personal violation, of trust betrayed in the most intimate and public ways imaginable. To understand why Aegon II acted as he did, we also need to consider the climate of Westerosi politics at the time. The Targaryens, though ruling over a kingdom of dragons and fire, were constantly vulnerable to internal dissent and factionalism. Every lord in the realm was looking for advantage, and every royal decision could ignite rebellion or war. Aegon II, aware of these realities, saw in Helaena a tool to strengthen his claim and secure the throne. By forcing her into queenship, he could gain the support of lords who valued dynastic continuity and who might otherwise question his legitimacy. In essence, the betrayal was as much about survival as it was about ambition, but that does not excuse the personal devastation it caused. Helaena's forced queenship was not a silent affair. The Targaryen court, with its intricate web of alliances, rivalries, and ambitions, watched the events unfold with varying degrees of horror and fascination. Some saw Aegon's actions as a necessary assertion of power, a demonstration that the Iron Throne demanded sacrifices, even from those closest to the king. Others saw it for what it truly was: a brutal violation of trust, a cruel imposition on a young woman who had already suffered under the weight of expectation. Helaena became both a symbol and a victim, her story a cautionary tale of how ambition can warp familial bonds into tools of control. The forced queenship also had profound consequences for Helaena personally. It stripped her of autonomy, of choice, and of the ability to chart her own destiny. She was thrust into the public eye, expected to perform the duties of queen with dignity, all while carrying the emotional scars of betrayal. Her life became a balancing act between survival and moral integrity, a tightrope that few could navigate without compromise. And in this, the cruelty of Aegon II's actions becomes starkly apparent. He did not simply seize power for himself, he wielded it in a way that destroyed the agency of those around him, including his own sister. Why, then, did Helaena not resist? The answer lies in both the nature of her character and the harsh realities of her world. Helaena was wise, empathetic, and aware of the dangers of open rebellion within the court. She understood that defiance could lead not only to personal ruin, but to destabilization of the kingdom she loved. Her acquiescence, therefore, was not a sign of weakness, but of prudence, a recognition that survival sometimes requires sacrifices of the self. Yet, even with this understanding, the emotional toll was immense. Helaena's betrayal was not just political, it was deeply personal, a wound inflicted by the one person she might have trusted most. The question of Aegon II's motives is complex and layered. On the surface, there is the undeniable drive for power. Aegon too coveted the throne, and he believed that consolidating the Targaryen line, even at the expense of his sister's autonomy, was a necessary step to secure his rule. Beneath this, however, lie elements of fear, insecurity, and a need to dominate. Helaena's intellect, her compassion, and her independence were qualities that could have undermined his authority. By forcing her into queenship, he neutralized these potential threats, simultaneously elevating and controlling her. It was a form of betrayal that was both strategic and deeply personal, a calculated exercise of power that left permanent scars. Historians continue to debate the ethical implications of Aegon II's actions. Some argue that, in the brutal calculus of Westerosi politics, his decisions were justified, that a king must sometimes make hard choices for the sake of the realm, even when those choices hurt family. Others contend that his actions were not merely political, but morally indefensible, that coercing one's own sister into queenship is an act of cruelty that cannot be excused, regardless of the pressures of the throne. And the truth likely lies somewhere in between, a mixture of ambition, fear, and personal failings that culminated in an act of betrayal that shaped the destiny of the Targaryen dynasty. The forced queenship of Helaena also had ripple effects throughout the kingdom. It sent a clear message to other nobles and potential rivals. Aegon too was willing to manipulate and control even those closest to him to achieve his goals. This assertion of power, while effective in consolidating his claim, also created resentment and unrest, sowing the seeds for future conflict. Helaena's story, in this sense, is emblematic of the broader consequences of personal betrayal in the pursuit of political ambition. One act of coercion can reverberate through the halls of power for years, shaping the trajectory of kingdoms and the lives of countless